Welcome on the Humans of Reliability podcast. I'm Silvan Kalache, Head of Developer Relations at Rootly. Today, we are joined by David Owczarek, a veteran Unix admin who started his career during the APRANET era. He has led incident response for startup and large enterprise. Let's get started. David, can you tell us a little bit about who you are in your career?
Thanks for having me. It's an honor. I am a person who's been kicking around website and data center operations for a very long career. When I was young, I had the unusual privilege to have access to computing facilities. This was in the late 70s, early 80s, and we actually had an Apple computer in my house. My parents were teachers. That's pretty unusual for folks from my generation, I guess, and it led to a long career in tech. My first job out of college was working for a company named BB&N, Bolt, Beranek and Newman, and they were known for being the other half of the first internet link between UC Berkeley and the crew at MIT, which was working with BBN. And so my favorite story from that time is when I worked there was the first time I'd had an office. So I was like an engineer with an office, and I felt really proud because I was like fresh out of college. And I sat down, there was a blade switch on the wall, one of these Frankenstein switches, and it was labeled ARPANET. And I thought, oh my God, is this the room? This was the place where it happened. Nobody actually ever gave me a straight story about whether or not that was the room, but the pedigree of that place and the research that took place, and, you know, they invented the @ sign for email and all of this stuff. It was like a science playground for me. And I was a Unix administrator, and that's what I did technically through most of my career. BBN helped to launch that. I went into consulting. I rode the .com boom and bust. You know, back in the early days, it was about servers and density on the data center floor and how do you get the most like power for each rack unit. Nowadays, honestly, the conversation is not that different. It's just that it's abstracted into containers or meshes or whatever. I had the opportunity to both go up through the ranks and do a lot of different jobs and come back and go up and down the sort of stack. So I've been a pure manager and lost my technical ability, and then started all over again and regained it and worked myself back up into management jobs. So it's been a fascinating journey. And I think one of the things that I find, you know, perspective I have from the whole thing is just that there are patterns that repeat, even if they have different types of content. There's very few transformationally changing things that happen. AI, of course, is one of them. So it's a great time to be at the forefront of that. But one of the first things I did at BBN was to write cloning software to generate not hundreds, but tens of workstations from a single image so that I could deploy a lot of servers, right? And it's not any different today in some respect, that it's all about system configuration and config as code and all the rest.
Thank you for coming on the show. It's going to be a great episode. You've done a lot of work in the field of incidents, and you've worked for small companies, but also large enterprise. What are your learnings? What do you think are the best strategies, and what's different between a small company incident response strategy and a large one?
The number of resources available is probably the thing that pops out the most. This can be different approaches from the people involved too, but generally I find that there's no absolutes when it comes to human behavior. You get good behavior or bad behavior everywhere. Might be a little less in small companies because it's harder to hide, I suppose. When I think about the resources available in a large enterprise, it is just something that you can't hope for in a smaller organization. I mean, the idea that you could get, for example, somebody from Amazon or Microsoft on the phone who can actually do something from an engineering perspective, who will actually get a piece of code changed for you, or even have a team work for a few extra days over the weekend to make something happen so that you hit a deadline on Monday. Those are things small companies just cannot get. But also the amount of resources, you know, hey, let's backhaul the prod data and try something before we make this big change. Oh, but it's going to cost $10,000 in, you know, transient costs at our cloud provider. Well, if you're a big company, that's an easy argument to make. If you're a small company, it really makes you stop and find scrappier ways to get it done because you don't have that kind of cash lying around. There's also a lot of process differences. I think sometimes you lose the connection to the customer in the larger organizations, so you have to build mechanisms on top of that. But customers don't let you off the hook anywhere of any size. I remember working for a small company, and our peskiest customer was actually 2 cows, which I don't mind naming because this was years ago, and it's for a good reason. They were the ones that would call us before our monitoring went off to tell us that there was an outage. This was back in like the 90s, right, or early 2000s. And I had tremendous respect for that because their monitoring was tighter than the tolerance I would allow, right? You don't want to have noise, so you don't want to set it too small. So we would, but they would set it so small because their business depended on it. And that's one of the things you learn interacting with customers, that, you have to respect the business that they're in and the things that they need to do.
Well, that's a fascinating angle. Like, I think from a point of view of SREs, we are looking at metrics like, uptime and time to resolution, and it's really blend and like number centric. I mean, we have SLOs, but like how do you blend customer expectation in the craft of incident management?
Well, one thing from an SRE perspective is that I find, in my experience, there's a lot of times that SREs don't actually know the function that they're trying to mitigate. Any big complex system, especially if it has microservices, they just proliferate, especially if you have a structure that allows for a lot of autonomy in engineering teams. And then all of a sudden, you have small functionings happen and people don't know what they are. So everything is kind of reduced to being a component, sort of a black box. And so I find there's a tremendous amount of engagement you can get if you just walk through what the thing is doing, so that an engineer who's troubleshooting it has a chance of saying, well, let me try this in the interface and see if I get the right result. Obviously, it's not always possible. Some of these applications are very complex. But if it's a consumer-facing thing, you'd think that you'd want everybody to know what the primary workflows were. And I'm not sure that's always true, because the metrics may abstract you from knowing what that is.
When we had our initial chat prior to the recording, you spoke about how you believe you can empower team to turn a negative situation, which is a net negative, into something positive for the customer experience. Can you share a little bit about this?
Part of this comes from working with really large customers on outages. And honestly, I was terrified the first time I had to present to like a global brand on an outage. And I quickly learned that they have a similar business. Most companies have an online presence. They understand everything that we're going through as a provider to them. What they want to know is that you care. And so there's a couple of patterns I learned were really, really helpful. One was providing a way for the customer to resolve their unhappiness by giving them a platform to voice what happened. Because we can say we had an error rate or a function down or whatever, but if they tell us nobody could buy shoes or I couldn't pay a supplier X, that really has impact. But it's really cathartic to be able to have the customer say that. And I think it's really helpful to have people hear it. And that kind of exchange, if the more you try to cover up or obfuscate maybe things that you're not as proud of, the deeper a hole you dig for yourself, because these folks are really smart and they can see through all of that. So if you come humbly and contritely, openly addressing all of the pain points, demonstrating that you care, demonstrating that you understand how it impacts their business, and if you don't, that you're willing to learn how it does, that makes you a good partner. And that's what business people really want. They know that there's going to be problems and people are going to get angry and stuff is going to get thrown around the room, but ultimately they want a partner that will hang with them and commit to them over the long term. And so if you approach the outage conversation that way with a customer, it's a very different interaction. If you come in on the defensive and hiding things and whatever, it just turns into a really, really bad meeting.
So again, it's kind of a twofold thing where you need to come prepared and transparent on maybe the technical side of what happened. And then, as you said, like as a business partner. And it sounds like it's more about just being here to listen and show that you understand rather than, other than anything else, right? It's pure empathy towards the, right?
Well, and, put yourself in their shoes. And so little things can mean a huge difference. Just reaching out by email a week or two later and saying, we closed these 2 action items. They will remember that for a long, long time. And so usually all I have to do is say, what would I want them to do if I really wanted them to take care of everything that I was concerned about? That's what I would do. In return, it's the golden rule. Of course, with with large companies, there's usually large business relationships on the line. So the leverage is a lot higher. The stress is a lot higher. Yeah, very different sometimes. I mean, small, there's always angry customers, I guess, is the...
There is. I mean, what's interesting with being an SRE, and I used to be one as well, is that this position requires so much, like a very diverse set of skills. Like it's about being able to design and build infrastructure, maintaining them, and then being able to function under pressure and work when there is an incident. And incident management is a craft in itself. And then we just touch base on the topics that oftentimes not really discussed about in industry, but it's communication with internal stakeholders, but also third parties. Speaking with customers or sharing news about an outage is in itself something that people are getting an education and are making a career out of it, like customer service, public relation, right? And then we're asking this SRE engineers to do that. Yeah, what's your take on this? Like, what makes a good incident manager or maybe a team? It's not that simple.
It's not. I've been thinking a lot lately about, using agents for incident commanders, but I had the experience of designing a training program for incident management and specifically for the incident commander role, and then rolling that out over a couple hundred people in an organization. And I learned a lot from that. One of the things that jumped out the most was the answer to this question of, should everybody in a certain class do a certain thing? So should every SRE be capable of writing a root cause analysis? Should every engineering manager be capable of being an incident commander? In most of these cases, my answer is going to be no. Well, it's sort of, you want it to be yes, but the reality is incident command in particular requires some skills that you don't need as an engineering manager. One of which is, this self-directed assertiveness to take control of a situation where there's a lot of strong personalities and steer everybody through to a certain outcome, knowing that your only base of power is the fact that you're in this role. You might otherwise not have any ability to tell these people what to do, but in that moment you do because you're the incident commander. And so when I trained all those people, I also was on incidents. So I saw them all perform as they came through the rotation. And a couple things happened. One, you have to do it frequently. So if you have a large rotation, you don't maintain the acuity of doing it more frequently. And there's a maximum number of people you want in the incident commander on-call pool, because if it's too large, they won't get enough runtime, essentially. My guess is that 15 or 20% of the people just don't have a critical capability, don't need it to be perfectly successful in their current job, and aren't going to be good candidates to acquire it. And so why put them through all of that in a super high pressure situation where the business is depending on them? It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, there's other reasons, but I think in a nutshell, that's it. And on the other side of it, probably, I don't know, and again, from my one experience with that population, 30 or 40% took to it well enough that they were effective, or they could be effective with relatively little advice or just modeling somebody else's behavior, which is great, but it's not 100% of the team. So I think it's helpful to recognize that, because it's a convenient way to expand your pool. The root cause analysis is another good one. To do a really good root cause analysis, you have to go work with other teams. Sometimes you have to get commitments about, okay, how are we going to fix this? Not everybody's good at that, and not everybody should have to be good at that. Maybe they should. I'm open to the argument. I think you want the people who are the most effective to be doing it. And if people don't have those capabilities, you shouldn't try to.
One of the few key personality aspects or skills you believe an incident commander should have?
It sounds really trite, but asking really good questions is one of the best ways to get things done, because it's not only a troubleshooting technique, it can be a control technique too. Are you really sure you want to do that? Being a good example. But you've probably had this experience too. I'd love to hear your experience, that you can have somebody who's not particularly well versed in the technology do an incredible job of being an incident manager because they understand a couple of fundamental things. Number one, I need to have not only a viable technical direction, but maybe some alternates in my pocket to make sure that this thing gets nailed. And then two, I need to manage what's happening with the people in the process around me. And then 3, I need to worry about my customers. That's a huge cognitive workload, but amazing when it comes together. And there's people who can do it who don't know about the technology that they're fixing.
Yeah, I guess, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's been one of the hardest things is keeping your head cool and straight and thinking straight and not crumbling under the pressure. Especially when you have an outage that's bringing the company down and you have executive or founder behind you and everybody's basically stopping to work while you are fixing it. I think that's like extremely stressful. And sometimes also incident happens at the worst time. During the night is like the classic example. And same here, I think you need to be able to collect yourself and dive pretty quickly in a situation that you don't want to be in. So being resilient and strong, I think just here and like having clarity under pressure, it's super hard. Like it's not something that anyone can do. So I agree with you that the technical part is not necessarily the most important. I think you need intuition and overall understanding of the mechanism. And one thing that's interesting is this SRE intuition. When an outage, an incident starts, like the best SRE will kind of have this instinct about where to look or what could be wrong. And so I think that an incident commander kind of needs this instinct or needs someone to feed them with this instinct. Actually, that's something that's quite interesting because as we are trying to build this AI SRE, we are trying to see if we can replicate this instinct that I'm speaking about. And the question, I believe, is kind of yes, because it's all about people being with the company and understanding the system well enough because they've been around that they kind of know where things could break. And with humans, this takes time. The beauty of LLMs is that they can ingest a lot of data and a lot of historical data, right? So you can kind of codify that. But it's definitely like a role that I never had a chance to take on. I worked on, even though I worked for LinkedIn, we didn't have this function back then, but definitely fascinating topic. Speaking of AI, and you spoke about it multiple times during the episode, maybe something that's transformative, or maybe it's not, it's just another cycle that we are going through. What are your thoughts on what's been happening here?
And with respect to SRE practices, there's a lot of great helpers out already. I mean, timeline generation, incident summary, root cause analysis, sort of initial drafting, chat transcription. And to me, it's just the interesting question going forward is where do you draw the line between having an agent do something productive and having an agent directing what's going on in a way that makes people uncomfortable? That's kind of where my mind has been focused, because the incident commander typically has to do that. And I just don't understand how good agent technology is around playing that kind of a role. And I also don't know how tolerant humans are to be directed by that kind of a role. So I've been trying to think about, is this a new kind of human in the loop, where it's not human in the loop to ensure that there's not a terrible mistake that's made? Maybe it is, but just in a different context. Human in the loop to be able to make statements of authority that people would be uncomfortable otherwise getting from an AI, which reduces the incident commander role to the highest value level of decision-making and coordination, and theoretically would take all the cognitive workload and throw it into something that's very, very well suited for it. So all this like customer communications and communication summaries, that seems like a simple task. And it doesn't take long before you can see how you could stitch most of that together so that the stuff that's just hard to keep track of and kind of statutory that happens during the incidents is just all taken care of. We're tracking down the action items and dealing with all of the things people said might help in the course of the conversation, and having that information like promptly available to folks, tracking down people to get them onto the response, doing timed escalations. So one thing that's interesting, maybe not about a large company, but about companies that get large complex applications, is that you get like multi-day events that, they may not be critically customer impacting, but they're severe enough that you have to respond in real time. And sometimes it takes a long time to fix the problem because there's dependencies and whatnot. And so there's a different kind of mechanism for long running events where you have to break up and get back together and figure out how to transition state information, that kind of stuff, extremely well suited. But at this point, I mean, I can also see AIs doing, what's a common, really the most common outage. Somebody deployed some code and it broke something and it's one line, they know exactly what. Just turn the crank and, right. We shouldn't even need a human for that in most cases, other than maybe that one human in the loop saying to say, yeah. But really, there's probably a pretty good number of outages that don't even require that. Actually, just as an aside, one of the things that really changed my whole perspective about SRE and how to look at incidents was the stuff that came out like 3 or 4 years ago, analyzing the outage duration based on company and industry and so forth, and determining that, oh, wow, they all have the same distribution. And it's just a positively skewed curve. And that answers so many questions I had about, why it's hard to manage by MTTR numbers and all the rest of it. And that's actually, believe it or not, informed a lot of my thinking to date, because I don't assume that my situation is unique. I assume that it might actually fall into a really well-established pattern that I just don't know. Food for thought anyway.
Going back to the beginning of your answer where you spoke about perhaps human not being comfortable directed by AI, have you seen a similar pattern happen between humans where perhaps the engineering team was not responding well to the incident commander?
I think there's a couple of classes. This is in the realm of human behavior. There are certainly interpersonal dynamics that can cause that have nothing to do with anything else other than the people involved. But I think there are occasions where the person running the incident is not moving fast enough, or sometimes it's really obvious. The next few steps are really obvious, for example. And if you have an incident commander who doesn't get that, either from the intrinsic facts or from the conversation that's happening in the call, then yeah, that does certainly weaken their position. And I think you will find people start to naturally just work through it around that person because it's faster. And that speed, it's all about speed in those occasions. There is certainly something about engineers and the amount of respect they have for each other and how that affects things. But typically in incidents, a lot of that stuff washes away, at least from my experience. And SREs are usually right on the front end of that because, we're so good at doing the diving catch, as they say.
Definitely not. Humans are complex and we have trouble understanding them. As LLM are also complex, we don't really understand what's going on. So I feel it's a good mix, Yeah.
Well, so when was the last time you heard a human yell on an incident call?
I mean, it's been a while. I haven't been on call, so.
I wouldn't happen, certainly, I know. But no, I think it's been a while for me, too. But I certainly have heard it. It's terrible. There's no reason for that. And this is why the whole blameless thing is so important, because you want people's best performance and you don't get that pushing them around. So
David, I know you write a bit. If people want to get in touch with you or, get to your reading, where should they go?
Probably LinkedIn is the best place. I write on Medium, but I'm not sure how long I'm going to do that because it doesn't seem to be that productive a place to build an audience. So mostly LinkedIn. Yeah. I have some other stuff I'm doing in music that actually also gets into AI, but that's referenced on my LinkedIn site, so people can go down that rat hole if they want to talk about content provenance and authenticity.
Cool.
Yeah.
David, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.